Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 91, and it's Connections Part 11. So this is continuing the story of Connor and Alma Rourke. And here we go. The days were filled for Alma, but extremely quiet for Connor. He did as much as he could and checked in on Grant occasionally by phone to see if Wolfe had done anything new, but mostly he had to recover. Alma, meanwhile, was working on her new project day and night, sparing any moments she could to see how Connor was recovering. "Maybe we don't have to this time," Connor said to Alma one day. He said it to her, but she was behind him in the room, and he was looking at the darkening sky. "So, we've reached this part of the cycle," she said. Connor did not reply. "My answer has not changed. We have each other. We have as much safety, comfort, and excitement as anyone can. We have reasons to keep going beyond each other, things we want to do, want to accomplish." Connor just continued to look out, the sun having set and the sky now purpling. "This happens every time, Connor. I think you know the answer." "Yes, we can't go alone." "No, that would be to truly die. To live on without you, without end. That torture I wouldn't wish even on Wolfe. Not even after what he did to you." "Thanks, beloved. I know it's a phase. I enjoyed this body." Alma couldn't suppress a chuckle. "Me too." It took weeks, but finally, Alma found what she was looking for. It started with a small item in the Los Angeles Times, and she followed up with a reporter who had covered it. The story seemed right, and after some dozen or more phone calls, she was in Los Angeles County Hospital looking at a young man she didn't know. He was comatose, and the prognosis was not good. Timothy Barnes had been in excellent physical health the night he hit a patch of oil and flipped over on his bike, which had damaged the nerves in the base of his brain and his upper spine. Other damage had also been done, but was healing. The doctors indicated that if he had been in poorer health, he likely would have died before he had gotten to them. What also interested in her was his story. He was young, healthy, though not wealthy by any means. He had no health insurance, and no one had come to visit him. His bike suggested that he was not homeless, and in fact Alma had tracked him to a low-rent apartment. But there were no other ties to him. An extensive search had determined that Timothy Barnes was 27 years old. His father had died when he was a youth, and his mother had died about 5 years ago, but that was back east in Kansas, and Timothy had not seen her even before that for some time. No siblings, no living relatives at all. He was a little cul-de-sac, and now he had lost what little he had to a bit of speeding and an unlucky moment on the pavement. All of this was against the HIPAA laws, of course. But it was this or do things the other way, the old way. The way they swore they never would again. Wolfe's way. She had been given a little time by herself with Timothy. To do what she needed, she would have to be extremely careful. She sat down next to him in a chair and leaned towards him. If she had gone completely slack, she would have stayed right where she was. The instruments attached to Timothy would signal if his cortex fired up, but hopefully a small flutter would not register, or at least not set off alarms. She laid her hand on his and carefully allowed her powers to take over. There was some minor disorientation. It couldn't be helped, but she had done it too many times for it to be anything other than the briefest of glitches. She could feel her way up, the nerves of his arm, then his shoulder, then his spine, just below the injury. She felt her way up and could tell that she could breach the damage. She was in his brain. And she felt, as she had so many times before, the small thrill as she took over. Yes, it would work. She sent the tiniest of signals down his arm to his hand. Just a twitch, and like a faint echo, felt it move. Immediately, she left, swarming back to her body, and woke up smiling. She looked over, and the instruments were quiet. In a few hours, Connor was there, cane in hand. "He looks like a nice young man," Connor said. Alma knew that he was trying hard to be respectful. This was not like moving into a new condo. But he could not act like he was doing anything other than what he was. That, in its way, would also have been disrespectful, even more so. Connor held Alma close. "Thank you, love," he said. They kissed, then Alma helped him into the chair by Timothy Barnes' inert body. Connor looked Alma right in the eyes and held her. Then, with a wistful half-smile, he laid his hand on the back of Timothy's and went limp. The machines did not perk up, but Alma knew it had worked, as it always had. This was all to plan. The rest had already been prepared. Several orderlies came and took Connor's body away. The reports would be vague as to where Connor was found inside the hospital. Patients, especially ones with recent injuries, sometimes collapsed for 1,000 different reasons. No one would bat an eye. Alma played her part, visiting Connor's body and playing the upset wife. Her husband was comatose, unresponsive, and nothing would bring him back. And to anyone who visited, she seemed distraught, distracted, and exhausted. Some of that she did not have to pretend. They had an airtight living will for Connor, and it was explicit in such cases. Though the staff could find nothing exactly wrong with him, nothing showed up on any sort of scan, and there were no visible wounds other than the healing ones from his wreck, it was undeniable that he was unresponsive. Somewhere around the second day, a buzz went around the hospital. A young man, Timothy Barnes, who was supposed to be in a permanently unresponsive state, had woken up. He had been in a legal limbo with no one around who could make a decision for him, and so he had been on life support for a long time. But he was strong. He had woken up and apparently was going to be leaving the hospital in a matter of days. Shortly after this happened, Alma received a cryptic text message on her phone, which she read with no visible expression. Over the next few days, Connor Rourke's body failed, and with no sign of his recovering consciousness, the living will came into play. When Alma paid her final visit, those in attendance thought she was saying a final goodbye. But she was saying goodbye to a long, good portion of her life. This was sad, but it was not final. That evening, Alma went to visit Timothy Barnes, who had recently returned home to his apartment. "Hello, Timothy. Or do you prefer Tim?" Alma asked. "Timothy feels better, but seems so formal," Connor, now Timothy, replied. By long-agreed custom, his old name would never be used again by Alma or by Connor himself, lest the connections be made between them. So, Timothy it was. Did he go by Timothy or Tim? Tim. Did our backgrounding catch everything? Yes. No living relatives, no close friends here in town, and really none back where he was. He sometimes donated blood. I suggest we give a donation to the Red Cross. They planned to clean the apartment and have the rent paid until Timothy's contract could be terminated. Timothy would, of course, go and live with Alma soon, though not quite immediately. This transition would end up with them moving eventually and getting different cleaning and other personal staff. No connection must be made between Connor and Timothy. Since they kept no staff at home at night, with only some security around and away from the house proper, Timothy visited Alma that evening. They spent hours getting to know Timothy's new body. This process was one they were used to, but always enjoyed. Alma and Timothy knew of examples of people with their powers who had taken over others' bodies to temporarily go on binges, whether sexual, chemical, or otherwise. This was beyond the pale for them now, though they had each done so before they had met each other and found a new way. Soon it would be Alma's turn, but there would be time. In the meanwhile, if some saw a wealthy, aging widow with a young man on her arm, it might be a source of gossip, but no one who knew Alma would really know what was happening. And that's the end of the story. So obviously we're at a pretty good stopping point. I do have some ideas for different stories I'm going to write for a little bit, but I could see us coming back to Connor and Alma, or perhaps I should say now Timothy and Alma's story again. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions about the episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thank you for listening. Copyright 2019, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.